Hello, students in English 103. This is Professor McKinnon, and I just wanted to review one of the sample student essays on freedom of speech and expression and limitations as a claim of value. Let's first of all look at the prompt for Essay 2, where it first identifies what a claim of value is. Unlike claims of fact, which attempt to prove that something is true and can be validated through data, claims of value make a judgment. They express approval or disapproval. They attempt to prove that an action, belief, or condition is right or wrong, good or bad, worthwhile, or undesirable. Two of the major areas in which people agree or disagree are aesthetics and morality. In this case, the topic that I have chosen for your essay has to do with a morality claim. Let's again look and review the importance of appeals to values. Needs give rise to values. Values are the principle by which we judge what is good or bad. People and institutions are usually defined by a system of values. Traditionalism is defined by merit such as merit, accomplishment, self-restraint, self-discipline. Stability, belief in basic moral universal truths. Modern progressivism is defined by tolerance, self-expression, sensual gratification, and alternative family formations, and ethical relativism. It celebrates change. Now, how do we evaluate an argument based on appeal to needs and values? As we look at this essay, I want you to look at these key questions. Have the values been clearly defined? Are the needs and values to which you appeal prominent in the reader's hierarchy of importance? Is the evidence in your argument clearly connected with the goals of the majority of your audience? Those are the basic qualifications for an appeal to needs and value. Now, if we go in that, I'm not going to go in essence, but I want you to have this in your mind, the prompt. It's all about the prompt. The prompt is, freedom of speech, are limitations on our rights ever justified? Now, in the prompt, it gives you an introduction. It talks about there's different ways of accessing conversations. There's questions about hate speech, whether it is legal under the First Amendment. This is what it tells you to do as far as your essay. Your task is to write an essay in which you address the topic of free speech and expression as a core American value. You may find yourselves walking a narrow line between truth and offense. Consider the question, if truth is offensive to some groups, should it nevertheless be expressed? The issue is complicated by the very nature of the academic purpose, which is usually defined as freedom in the search for truth. What about the media's right to expressing opinion? In this case, when we talk about free expression, what about artists' rights of free expression under the First Amendment? So, having those concepts in mind, let's look at our sample essay on freedom of expression versus freedom of choice. Many of you give back to me the exact title of an assignment, rather than creating a title which in itself should be the best hook to hook your audiences. This one does. You know by her title exactly that she's addressing this prompt, freedom of expression versus freedom of choice. Let's see what she does that. In her first paragraph, she provides the four most essential components of this argument. First of all, she defines what music is. As a form of art, music is known for expressing one's inner feelings and thoughts freely and aesthetically. Then she goes on and says, undoubtedly, Music can be defined as freedom of expression where one is allowed to, without restraint, vent out literally anything and everything. Defining her term. Now she makes a direct connection to that free expression art form to the First Amendment. The Bill of Rights stresses the importance and power of freedom of expression in the First Amendment, and thus many artists and musicians convey their opinions and even grudges towards society and world through their music. Now she presents an opposing point of view, which I, in my previous lesson, addressed. However, much regulation arises to block and restrict certain lyrics that go beyond the scope of freedom of expression and speech, such as parental involvement and rating stickers. Now let's look at her sources, how she introduces them, and how she uses them to back each other. The first one that she uses, she starts with, and in this particular article, it's an older article, but it applies. I want you to first of all look at how in each of her sources, how she accurately introduces the source and gives you context. That's one thing that was lacking sometimes in student essays, introducing sources properly. Think of your essay as being given as a speech. If you give a speech, you're going to introduce the sources. You're just not going to rely on an in-text citation. And she does that well. In Sam Brownback's speech and essay, Free Speech, Lyrics, Liberty, and License, Brownback, the well-known American politician and 46th governor of Kansas, gives his credentials, denounces or criticizes music lyrics that, quote, glorify rape, sexual torture, violence, and murder. Then she analyzes it. Brownback is concerned about the relationship between music and freedom since music has a powerful public impact on young people. Again, right away, she's identifying the problem. Then what she does, which is very, very wise, is she uses a second source to back up that first primary source. She says Brownback is not alone. She says Tipper Gore, a wife of former President Al Gore, persuades in her writing, Curbing the Sexploitation Industry, elders and adults, especially parents, to stand up for vulnerable young adults who are excessively blinded by the fanciness of artists with sagging pants and dazzling jewelry. Excellent quote from Tipper Gore. Young children, quote, who lack moral judgment of adults are likely to consume every unfiltered message that involves violence, sex, and degradation of women. Now what she does is she turns to the task at hand, which is, what do you do about this negativity in music? It is not an easy task to determine which music should be banned. And Brownback talks about great deals of conflict occur measuring the boundary line that indicates acceptable and unacceptable songs and lyrics. They bring up Anna Quindlen, and that is the basis of Anna Quindlen's article. Her article is an opinion piece, is pure emotional appeal. It's not a primary source like Brownback and Gore is, but it is very strong emotional appeal, where Quindlen strongly believes that music should not be censored or rated. She condemns that. She even condemns labels as a form of overregulation. Despite all this debate regarding regulations and freedom, countless music industries are selfishly taking advantage of freedom of expression and speech to gain profits and fame. So notice that she shows that there are two opposing viewpoints, but they are a debate. In other words, she's fairly showing that both sides have valid points. She goes on to say that companies earning money is not immoral or deplorable, but they also are very powerful, and they have to face the fact that forcing conformity for their own financial benefit makes a negative impact on society and its people. And then she gives a good example. Now, this particular student comes from a place where she was an international student from China. So she has the experience to show two different forms of society. First of all, in this paragraph, she talks about a comparison, what she talks about as far as conformity in society. She brings up how when she was in middle school, certain brands and music were significantly popular. She said these fashion trends, music trends, significantly affect young adults in many ways. She goes on to explain that unknowingly I was forced by the music industry to listen to or revere artists and songs that they were producing. But she said the messages weren't necessarily rich and positive. Now she brings up a good example. The song Cop Killer by a rapper named Ice-T, for example, illustrates extreme violence from inner city's African American anger toward white-based society. According to Michael Kinsley's article, Ice-T, the issue is social responsibility. When the song Cop Killer stirred controversy, the company that produced it defended itself by mentioning freedom of expression and blaming society for not speaking out against violence. Now, are you seeing a pattern here where she is being fair-minded by going back and forth and showing both sides? Okay? She is showing that this is a value that must be defended even though there are negative influences. Then she makes a judgment. And remember, you make a judgment in a value claim. There should be no conformity whatsoever through freedom of expression in music that most likely affects teenagers negatively and destructively. That is her value that she's defending. As society respects freedom of expression in modern music, music industry should value consumers' freedom of choice. The point that she's starting to make, and this is an interesting point, that because of their power, many times the music industry actually is pushing listeners to conform to certain types of music more often than negative. We've all heard the term sex and violence sell. Then she brings up a very strong point from her personal experience. Let me differentiate the conformity pressed by communism and music industry to portray lack of freedom in a democratic country like the United States. She goes on to explain that in communism, the rules are clear-cut. There is no freedom of expression. Citizens have no control. Nevertheless, communist countries and the United States are no different because of music businesses' interventions in American society. The point that she is making that the negative influence is controlled by a large corporate interest. And then, of course, she is going to use one of the most famous anti-corporate business entity, famous musician, the late Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa, a recognized professional musician, producer, and writer, argues on Junk Food for the Soul in defense of rock and roll that money or mercantile forces makes music evil and dark. A little bit of the background, if you notice in the article that was written by Frank Zappa. This article actually was his presentation to a Senate committee on problems with the negative influence and exploitation of the music industry. Merchants are seeking after innocent teenagers to sell violence, degradation of women, rape, and murder. Quote, record companies that promote violent music implicitly push the idea that more people should listen to, purchase, and enjoy the sounds of slaughter, and that's from Brownback. Then she goes on to show, and now is the start of her ideas for solutions. It's important for young children and teenagers to hear and listen to positive lyrics. She brings up an excellent outside source called Modern Music with a Positive Message. And some of you mentioned in your discussion board comments that there is positive rap and hip-hop music out there. An anonymous author insists that, quote, celebrities and other people outside of the family have a lot of control over how a child sees herself, so hearing good things can only help. In reality, this is from Brownback again, quote, society has become more accustomed and tolerant to violence and hate. At the same time, violence and misogyny increased in popular music. She talks about studies that have been done to illustrate loss of self-esteem among young girls. You guys have read all of the articles, so obviously you know that the next source that she's going to use is Chuck D and or Clarence Page. Chuck D, the former Public Enemy frontman, criticizes rappers, corporations, and the recording industry for, quote, saturating and disfiguring the minds of naive teenagers. Chiefly, music businesses are dictating, quote, how the public should live their lives. She goes on, unmistakably, silence is neither an answer nor a solution. Silence is utterly effective enough to support the way music industry creates certain lifestyles and alter values in life. Her major solution to the problem is the public needs to take responsibility. And we are now into her conclusion. Her solutions that she's proposing to solve the problem. In a democratic society, unlike in a communist society, it is citizens' obligation and job to express judgments and voices regarding provocative and harmful lyrics and messages in songs. If American society remains silent and gives no feedback to consumers, sellers, businesses are likely to produce even worse songs and music. In order to sustain the free society, quote, a distinction between what is allowed and what is honored is necessary. Again, now she reinforces the importance of protecting the First Amendment value. Although many words and lyrics and songs are protected by the First Amendment, it doesn't exactly mean that people are obliged to respect or listen to them. Instead, consumers should aptly utilize freedom of expression to criticize and discourage forms of speech that need criticism. As society becomes careless, more music will become destructive and corruptive due to lack of regulations. Just like voting matters hugely during the presidential election, comments, specifically the negative ones, matter immensely, settling disputes between music and freedom. Recording industries should never forget that music, as a type of art, is meant to evoke aesthetic and pleasing features of life in the universe. Thus, regarding violence, sex, and illegal drug abuse in music as heroic and proud acts should not be respected nor admired. She concludes with a study that revealed that no one spends more time listening to music than young people. Young adults' minds and consciences absorb music like sponge take in water or any kinds of liquid substance. Music is ruling over public and private components in their and our lives. However, if music starts to disrupt the lives of human beings by setting certain rules and systems, it will no longer be called an art. Again, violence involving deaths and murders, degradation of women, racism, and drug abuse, fads that appear most often in modern music, are unacceptable and immoral. Music businesses should never misuse music and freedom of expression to win the hearts of consumers. Instead, such big and influential corporations must promote a positive and healthy society by acknowledging freedom of expression and choice in individuals' taste in music. Now, whether you agree or disagree with her argument, she makes a very persuasive point. And remember, she is defending the value of the First Amendment, but in the same essay, she is also defending the rights as to what should be honored and positive in a society. Here is her work cited. It is a proper annotated work cited. Your citations are double-spaced, hanging indents. There's your Annotations. And you can see, I want you to particularly look at the one on Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa, a composer, singer, songwriter, record producer, and an advocate for political awareness, writes that rock and roll is not the cause or work of the devil, and this misconception would be gone if more money was put into music appreciation courses. He uses personal observation and research study statistics to support his argument. His purpose was to answer criticism of rock and roll music by music critic Abe Bloom, and to help get more music classes in school, as well as to convince people that rock and roll is a legitimate music genre and not evil. He writes to those who have a different view about rock and roll, especially its critics. So, again, looking at this essay, it is in the file folder. For those of you that want to write about something different, but even if you don't want to write about music, the structure of her argument is a good claim of value. And you can see she is directly connected freedom of expression with First Amendment and defending it as a value, but at the same time showing how elements of it are concerning. So I think it's a good example. I think the structure of her argument is very persuasive, and just gives you another little bit of an example of how to approach this particular topic. So I hope this has helped some of you as far as thinking about structuring your argument. Thank you so much. Have a good week.